of sorts.
It's good there, and then good interview. That was all right. But I did have a lot of support there.
Yeah. And I was, I'm sure you wish I could be doing that, not me. So, yeah. But, no, after all discount we are. Well, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Tim Clarke, and I'm one of the journalists at West Australian. My official title is the Legal Affairs Editor, and in that role, it was my, how should we put it, my privilege, I suppose, to cover the trial of Bradley Robert Edwards. It's a couple of years ago now, but it still sticks in my mind quite vividly, and I'm sure yours too, or some of you that are listening and watching today. For those of you who don't know, Bradley Robert Edwards was eventually convicted of being the Claremont killer. Two young women taken in the 80s and 90s, or in the 90s, the murders, and brutally killed and then dumped. That case basically haunted and stalked Perth for a long time. And before that trial started, we thought as journalists that there would be more to it as the trial unfolded, and obviously that was proved correct. And one of the parts of the story that we hadn't heard until the trial was the story of the brave and pretty awesome woman sat to my right. Her name is Wendy Davis. We weren't allowed to say her name during the trial for legal reasons that are probably too boring to recount, so I won't. But the point being that Wendy was part of a much bigger story in terms of Claremont, but as it turned out, a much wider story globally, I suppose, in terms of a woman who was dealt with violently back in an era in Australia and other parts of the world where at the time she felt she wasn't listened to, she wasn't heard, and her voice was basically either silenced or certainly minimised, so much so that it was negligible. But now, many years on, she's reclaimed that voice. She reclaimed it during the trial in terms of giving her evidence, which was undoubtedly part of a piece of the prosecution that helped convict Bradley Edwards. And now she's reclaimed the voice and dialed it up to 11, I suppose, as they say on Spinal Tap, by writing a book about her experience during that trial and before and after. So Wendy, welcome. Congratulations on the book. I had the privilege of reading an early draft, but I've read the final version, and it's an amazing achievement, an amazing story, an amazing that you were able to reclaim your voice and tell the story that you wanted to back in 1990 for all those years since. So thanks for joining us. Thanks for sharing the book and the story, and thanks for sharing some time as well to be able to talk about it and hopefully answer some questions about it.
Thanks, Tim. You're welcome.
So, as I say, I'll give the background to the book. So, as I said, in 2020, it was the longest and most expensive trial in Western Australian history. Edwards was convicted of two of the what had been dubbed the Claremont Serial Killers. But during the trial, it was revealed that Edwards had, prior to the murders, violently assaulted a social worker while he was working on the telephone system at Hollywood Hospital, and she was just doing her job, writing a report quietly in her favourite shoes, if I remember. But that event impacted Edward's life slightly at the time, but immeasurably impacted Wendy's life at the time and for many, many years since. The memoir, it's called Don't Make a Fuss, it's only the Claremont Serial Killer, details the journey of Wendy, the social worker, Wendy the wife, Wendy the woman, Wendy the mother, Wendy the victim for a time, and now Wendy the survivor. And in writing it, Wendy's quite candidly said before, during, after, and just 10 minutes ago before we went live, that it's become a means of her finding a voice, finding a meaning in what happened to her and what happened since, and finding a way of healing. So, Wendy, firstly, what inspired you to tell the story in the first place, and then write the book?
Okay, I had no intentions of writing a book when I first found out that the man that had attacked me all those years ago had been arrested for 2 of the Claremont serial killings. And the trauma that came up for me when I heard that news was so overwhelming that it took me weeks to process what had actually happened, and lots of memories came up. And I saw a counsellor of the victims of crime in Holland who suggested that I start documenting what was happening and what had happened to me and what was happening now. And that would actually help me to deal with what was going on for me. So I started writing, and when I did first start writing, it was all about me. It was all about my trauma. It was painful. Things that came up were not just about the attack, they were about my whole life, what had led up to that, things that were happening in my life at the time, and I was forced to examine everything. And then in the long 3 years leading up to the trial, I started to see that I was part of a much bigger story, and I started to get a little bit of perspective. And I was still documenting, I was writing, and I started to see that I had a story of my own. And then there was, as the time went on, and it was at a time when women were starting to speak out, I realised that my story was really important in terms of women being able to talk about what happened to me, that happened to many other people. And as the story took shape, I started to realise that it was important enough to make it public, and it was very important to me that I was heard. And so that's, I suppose, the genesis and how the book developed. Yeah.
So obviously a very personal experience. We had to examine yourself and parts of your life and things that you've forgotten that even happened, or certainly put to the very back of your mind. The process of writing the book, talk us through that. Was it painful? Was it cathartic? Was it all of those things and more?
It was very mixed, Tim. There was a lot of pain just in I suppose, the actual writing of the book. When I first started, I had little bits of paper all over the house, packed by my bed. There were books that I started to fill up with notes, and they didn't make a lot of sense. But as I started to pull it all together, and I was writing things down, I could feel the story coming out of me, and I could feel, as it was getting down onto the paper, it was becoming real, and I could feel myself starting to take control of what was actually happening. And I felt compelled to keep writing the story, but it was at the same time, as you said, very painful emotionally, And it brought up so many things that had happened to me in my life, because I had experienced violence before that attack too, and I hadn't even really thought about that. And I look back now and I wonder why that was never dealt with. So there was a lot of things that were very difficult to deal with, and but at the same time, I felt compelled to do it. There were so many feelings that overwhelmed me as the news from WA came out. As the trial, the lead up to the trial progressed, and I felt I was angry. I was very, very angry. And I'm thinking about what had happened to me and the fact that nobody listened to what I had to say at the time. I also felt an incredible amount of guilt for what happened after to the young women that were had their lives taken away, and I had to process that and deal with all of that. And writing it all down enabled me to understand the context within which that it had happened, and I understood and saw some of the broader reasons why it happened. But I also wanted to write and take responsibility for my part in the story, and that was really, really important to me to be able to do that.
Don't make a fuss. That's an age-old phrase that's many women of your era and before and after have been told about many things, but probably the most understated title about a true crime story of this vast scale. It's obviously just what you felt like, or what you were told at the time it happened. But you've also decided, no, I'm not going to make a fuss about it now, because it's a story that needs to be told and needs to be told from my perspective with my voice.
Yes, I wanted to. I finally got to a point where I wanted to take control of the narrative for myself. I wanted to present exactly what had happened, because I knew that people were really interested in the story, and B, I thought it was really important that people understood the reasons, some of the reasons why somebody like Bradley Edwards was able to exist in society and go on to commit the crimes that he did, and where he came from. I believe that serial killers don't appear from nowhere. They practice before they actually go on to do their crimes. There's a lead up to that, and I believe that's what I now believe and see that's what he was doing. He was practicing with me, and I believe so strongly now that women should be supported to speak up in a way that I was never supported to speak up, because my story, this story, is the perfect example of what can happen if you don't speak up about violence. Violence actually is very rarely a one-off. When people experience violence, it often escalates, and terrible, terrible things can happen. And I think women are starting to have a voice, and I wanted to add my voice to that chorus. And I wasn't able to do it then, and nobody listened to me. But when I first started to feel listened to, I wanted everybody to listen to it, everybody.
And it's such a long time between what happened to you physically and then the emotional impact of that. And from getting that phone call out of the blue a couple of days before Christmas, when the West Australian police rang you up and said, "It's Davis, got something to tell you." I'm not sure whether they asked you when you were sitting down. I think you were driving when you first took the call. Was that the first moment that you felt, wow, I'm going to get a chance to actually be listened to now after all these years?
Well, I had 2 phone calls. I had one from a detective, from Katie, the detective, before he was arrested, who just asked me, did I remember what had happened to me all those years ago? And I did. And I hadn't thought about it consciously for years, but it all came flooding back bit by bit. But at that stage, I didn't know why she was ringing me. And she said they were investigating some old crimes and she would get back to me, but not to talk to anybody about it.
So completely out of the blue, no context at all.
No context. And so that was the beginning of my trauma, because everything started to resurface. And it was a couple of days later, I think 3 days later, and I just went to my Pilates class, and I got into the car afterwards, and there were some messages because I'd turned my phone off, and my husband said, "You need to ring Katie, the detective who rang you the other day. It's very important." So I rang, and she said, "I needed to talk to you because I need to tell you that the person that attacked you all those years ago has just been arrested for the Claremont Serial, 2 of the Claremont Serial Killings, and it will be all over the news, and we'll be in touch with you to get some more information." And then I drove home, and I don't even remember getting home, and that was the beginning of probably the most difficult Christmas that I have ever spent. And it was very difficult. But we had a number of phone calls after that, Katie and I, and that for me was the beginning of feeling listened to. She asked me lots of questions. She wanted to know what had happened. And I did say to her, this is the first time that anybody has really listened to what actually happened to me. So
incredible, given that it had already gone through one court process, and you were in a very close family relationship with a police officer at the time when it happened. But it took this to happen, and that detective from a different era, completely different era, to need you to tell the story as part of what would become the biggest trial in Western Australian history.
That's right. That's right.
And obviously, then, particularly with your part of that story, we found out the very important thread that would run through all of it definitely started with your part of it, and that was Telstra, or Telecom as it was at the time, because Ed was working for that company at the time, was on a job for that company at the time, at the hospital you were working for, when he manhandled you and then was basically arrested on the spot.
Yes.
Telstra have, quite rightly, in my opinion, copped a lot of criticism for the way they handled their employee at the time. What would you like for Telstra, but also the police, to learn from how they handled your case at the time?
Well, I mean, I found out, and I didn't find out till during the trial because I buried everything after the attack, but I found out that when I found out that not only didn't he lose his job, but he was promoted twice, I was devastated and astounded. And after the verdict, Telstra made a public apology on behalf of Telecom and said that what happened to me wouldn't happen now. And I like to think it wouldn't, but it did happen. It can happen. And basically, I think they need to have processes in place to ensure that if anything happens while people are on the job, that it's dealt with appropriately. And the WA police, from what I understand, made many mistakes and got many things wrong in the investigation over many years. And I know hindsight's a wonderful thing, but I think that the police did not listen to what I had to say at the time. Telecom didn't listen to what I had to say. Everybody seemed to be more interested in the fact that it was very important for this young man, sensitive young man, I was told, to keep his job. And it didn't. I'm astounded. I'm still a little bit gobsmacked, actually, whenever I think about it, that it wasn't handled appropriately at all. And
just to put it into context, this wasn't Edward's just saying something inappropriate or showing you something inappropriate. He physically grabbed you from behind, as sort of illustrated on the cover, dragged you towards the toilet, and you, as you said, or as we heard for the first time when you gave your evidence in person at the trial, you genuinely and viscerally feared for your life in that moment. Absolutely.
I have never been so terrified. He grabbed me around the neck. He lifted me off the chair. I had bruising and contusions on my neck. I thought I had whiplash afterwards. I was terrified, and I found out in the trial that the security officer had actually told the police that came that he was trying to drag me into the toilet. And I didn't know that at the time. I found out that he'd been referred to a sexual offenders program. I didn't know that at the time. So for me, there are a lot of questions. There still are a lot of questions around what actually happened.
Quite rightly so. And you mentioned the court case, and obviously you were well aware it was coming. You admitted you sort of you did follow the lead up, but not only that, you were also being prepared for your part of it. And you know, the average reader might not know what goes on in preparation for a trial, or any trial, but let alone a trial of this size and magnitude. So just give us some insight of what the preparation for the trial was like in terms of talking to lawyers and police and things, because it's not just a case of being told a date and a time and you turn up and you just get questions asked of you in the courtroom out of the blue.
No, the process infiltrated, I like to use that word, every area of my life for about 3 years. And it started with the phone calls, and then there was a 2-day visit from detectives to my home in Hobart, where again at the same time there were mixed feelings because I listened to, I was telling my story, they were actually asking me, things were coming back. But also that was coming back was the horror, the anxiety, the anger that I felt at the time. So I was dealing with all of that. And then over the next months, there were more phone calls, more visits. So I have a distinct memory of being in the supermarket when the DPP called me to update me on something, and I went away to a quiet corner of the supermarket with my trolley to talk to him. And so every time I came to Perth to see my family, there was a meeting with the police or a meeting with the DPP. So it was there. And the difficulty, I think, for me was, on the one hand, living so far away in Tasmania, I felt protected to some extent from all the publicity and everything that was in the paper. But on the other hand, I felt so part of it and so drawn to it that I was reading everything on social media. I took out a subscription to the West Australian so I could understand and see everything that was going on. I felt I needed to know everything. And so it was really, really mixed, but it was a huge part of my life. And the writing of what turned into the book was absolutely crucial for me to have some control and have some understanding and have some bigger context, put some bigger context onto everything. So the book was really bringing everything together.
Even though at the time you didn't necessarily know you were writing, but you were bringing, it's coming out of you, and obviously you felt that you were going to put it into some sort of order at some stage. And then ironically, we didn't know about you, as just said, we, the journalists who were covering the case, because the process is, it dribbles out coming up to a trial, and there were also applications for whether it was going to be with a jury or not, and what exact piece of evidence. So for all those months and months and months, I suppose you were also being told that you can talk to some people that you trust, but don't go spilling to any pesky journalist that might find out and ring you up. So you're finding your voice, but then even then being told, well, you can't use it yet.
And I had that feeling of being told, because it's so internalized in my being not to make a fuss. So I had that feeling all of the time. And even now, I can still feel it. Like I know I'm speaking and I'm talking about it, but I have this little feeling that I might get into trouble.
Well, I think any trouble that you might get into is long gone, but it's you have made a fuss, and I think you've had every right to after what transpired. And obviously, attitudes to experience like yours have changed. I think it's safe to say that hopefully women of all ages who have been through any experience like this will feel like if they were to speak up, they would be listened to and believed now, or certainly more than you were then. Do you think they've changed enough? Different attitudes and the way that the women are being able to tell their stories has changed enough?
I think there's been enough publicity. I think enough women are being given much more of a voice, but I think there's still an underlying feeling of it's better, to not make too much of a fuss. So I think that women need to be, and I know how difficult it is to find your voice, to speak up about what's happened. But I think that women feel more comfortable in talking to other women. I think that there are things like the 1-800 number Respect. There are things set up. Most organisations have got policies about any type of abuse or anything that happens in the workplace. So I think that it's safer, and I think younger women are feeling more that they can speak up. But I also understand that it is really, really difficult for some women to do that. Yeah, I would just encourage women to, if they find themselves in a situation where they're experiencing any violence, to think about the fact that violence, as I said before, rarely occurs on just one occasion, that it usually escalates and that terrible things can happen if you don't speak up about it.
And you've said all the way along, while you were writing the book, and since it's come up, that the writing experience was helpful, was painful, but was helpful. What advice would you give to anyone thinking about writing about any of their experiences, whether they be traumatic or not? What did you find helped you along the journey?
The writing itself was a cathartic process, and ironically, as a counsellor, I had advised people to do that myself in the past, but I had never done it. So I found the writing was, it got everything out, and it enabled me to get the context that I needed around to understand what had happened to me. And for me, I don't know about anybody else, but for me, it was important, and it turned into a story and into a book. But
that wasn't your intention.
No,
It was the process itself, the actual getting the words out on the page, that was the first thing, and then it became what it became.
That's right. And for me, the knowledge that hundreds of people have read that book, hundreds of people have listened to my story, is the most reassuring and satisfying, and I feel as if I've really been heard. I feel as if I'm not alone. I feel people understand what's happened to me, and I am very grateful. I'm very, very grateful. Yes.
And from that, I think we can take the book, writing it, seeing it on the shelf, has helped you process everything that's happened, but move on from it as well.
Yes, it has. It has. Yes.
Well, I hope that some of the people watching and listening might have some questions of their own to ask. So we'll be happy to try and answer some of them. I'm hoping most of them towards Wendy. No one's got any questions for boring or journalists like me.
So one of the questions was, what advice would you give to women who are fearful about speaking out? I think you touched on that one, but
yeah. I understand how difficult. I understand as much as anybody how difficult it is to speak out. But I think if you can find a trusted person to talk to in the first instance, I look back and I know that some of my closest friends that I didn't speak to have said, why didn't you speak to me? And I think that just speaking, just saying what happened, just speaking can lead to something actually happening. So I think that's probably really important. But I also know that there are services that you can ring that will deal in confidence in the first instance, and just verbalising what's actually happening to you can help you to take control of your own story, your own narrative. It means that somebody else is not in control of your life, so you're starting to take control of it. So that's there, but I do understand how hard it is to actually do that.
Another question, do you think writing about your experience has helped other women who have read your story?
Absolutely, I do believe that writing has helped other women. Most of my women friends of my era have talked to me and said how they've had probably similar things, some of them, probably not that led to such terrible things that happened in this instance, but they've had similar things have happened to them. And and they wish they'd spoken out about it. They wish they'd talked about it. And I like to think that just writing my story has added to the voice of women speaking out about violence. Yes.
And the final one, there have been a number of books written about the case, but what's different about yours?
Okay. This story, my story, is about what happened to me, but it's also about what can happen, what's happened to women in our patriarchal society, and it's about what can happen if women are not given a voice. So it's actually not a story about Bradley Edwards. It's a story about Wendy Davis, and it's a story about what happens to women. And that's what's different about my book. Yeah.
Well, I for one would heartily recommend it, Wendy. I read it again just a few weeks ago, and your strength, your advocacy, and your insight into not only what happened with to you at that time, but what's happened in society since. I think, as you just said much better than I can, it's you're part of a bigger story, but you have been a big part of a big story for many years. I have to say it's been one of the great privileges of my professional career to speak to you so many times on the podcast and now today. So I thank you for your openness, your candor, and your bravery, for speaking out then and being able to speak out now. And I hope anyone who reads the book is going to get something out of it. But I hope that particularly any woman that reads it will be stronger, I think, for hearing your voice and hearing what you've got to say. So thanks for joining us this afternoon, and good luck with the book and with the rest of your, what's hopefully a happy dotage.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you very much. Thank you.